Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on unlocking the private sector, effectively leveraging corporations to support development goals. My name is Susan Mitchell, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm a Principal Associate and Vice President here at Abt Associates, and I'm also the Director of the USAID Global Health Flagship Project focused on private sector engagement called SHOPS Plus, and it is truly a pleasure to welcome you to the webinar. Before we get started, a few comments on the technology. Next slide. You will notice that I've turned off my camera, which I know isn't ideal, but we've decided to keep all video off to minimize bandwidth issues, as not only are our presenters presenting from across the globe, but we know most of you are now joining us from your homes as we wait out the COVID-19 pandemic. And if your home is at all like mine, your internet access isn't as good as it usually is in the office. In addition, we have muted all participants so as to minimize background noise. That said, if you're having any technical difficulties, you can send in those questions on the chat bar. You can get to the chat bar by clicking on the chat button, which you can access by hovering in the middle of your screen. You can also use the chat bar to pose any questions to the presenters. We will begin to answer those questions after the 3 presentations are complete, but please feel free to post them at any time. I also wanted to let you know that we will be recording this webinar and the responses to the questions, and we'll be posting the responses with the full webinar over the next week. Next slide. So we'll be spending the next hour hearing from our colleagues from across the globe speak about how they are forging partnerships with the private sector to improve health outcomes, increase livelihoods, and improve the business environment for both women workers and female entrepreneurs. Today's presentations will highlight that through partnerships with the private sector, we can leverage expertise and resources that can help us more sustainably and effectively improve development outcomes. In the 3 presentations, you'll hear examples from different countries and contexts, a variety of development sectors, including health, agriculture, and economic growth, and hear about partnerships that are all at very different stages of development, from pilot to scale. But all three presentations point to some common lessons in developing partnerships with the private sector. So now let me turn it over to our presenters who can give you a bit more detail on each of their partnerships. Next slide. The first presentation will be from Mbogo Bunyi, who is joining us from Kenya. Mbogo will be speaking to you about a partnership that our USAID-funded SHOPS Plus project is implementing with the Twinings Tea Corporation to improve access to health services for female tea farmers in rural Kenya. Mbogo is an international development expert who has spent his career working throughout sub-Saharan Africa to support organizations and governments to craft solutions for their immediate challenges by helping them effectively leverage their extensive networks, relationships, and resources. In his current role as Senior Private Sector Advisor for the SHOPS Plus project, Mbogo is working closely with governments, corporates, and development organizations to build partnerships focused on improving health outcomes. Mbogo will be followed by Walid Salam, who is joining us from Egypt. He is a COP for the Abt Feed the Future Rural Agribusiness Strengthening Project and will be speaking specifically about the partnership they've developed with the PepsiCo Corporation to improve the livelihood of rural Egyptian farmers. Walid has over 15 years of experience contributing to the growth and development of the Egyptian agribusiness sector. Through his experience leading 3 USAID-funded agribusiness projects, he has worked with a wide variety of actors, including exporters, government officials, logistics service providers, financial institutions, corporations, and industry associations to develop Egyptians' agricultural value chains and to help value chain actors exploit domestic and international market opportunities. Finally, we'll be hearing from Julia Newton-Howes, who is joining us from Abt Australia. Julia will be talking to us about a variety of corporate partnerships she has developed to improve women's economic empowerment in Southeast Asia. Since 2016, Julia has been the CEO of Investing in Women, an Australian government initiative working with the private sector in the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Myanmar to increase women's economic participation as employees and as entrepreneurs. Previously, Julia was CEO of Care Australia. She has held various senior positions across different geographies over her 25 years in international development, including advisor to the board at the World Bank and Assistant Director General at USAID. I'd like to now turn it over to our first presenter, Mbogo Bunye. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Susan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us today. As Susan mentioned, my name is Mbogo. I am based in Kenya, and I support our Shops Plus activities in the East Africa region. And today I want to share about our partnership where we are partnering with Twinings Tea to improve access to healthcare services for women in Kenya. This is particularly apt at this moment, as I know in all our countries, we are grappling with increasing access to healthcare services because of the strain caused by COVID-19. Next slide, please. So this partnership brings together two key partners, and the first, Twinings Tea. Twinings is a global tea brand based in the UK. They run an ethical tea program called Sourced with Care that aims to improve the quality of life in the communities from which Twinings buys their tea. As Susan highlighted, the second partner is ourselves, Shops Plus, who are a private sector project and USAID's flagship project, and we look to tap the full potential of the private sector and catalyze public-private engagement for improved health outcomes. I want to take a moment to speak to how this partnership came about. Twinings Tea had been investing since the year 2015 in a social responsibility program called by BSR called Health Program, which seeks to increase demand for healthcare services by farmers in the supply chain. In 2017, Twinings made a commitment to expand the reach of their program from about 6,000 tea workers to 40,000 by the year 2020. It is with this in mind that Twinings and Shops Plus then began discussions in 2018 on areas of mutual interest and ways we could work together. These discussions were formalized in 2019 and were captured on the common objective that articulated the approach as developing a strategy that will enable Twinings to sustainably expand access to women's and children's healthcare services in their supply chain. So that's the background of this partnership. Next slide, please. So to get moving, we had to build from what exists so that we could expand women's access to healthcare services. And to do so, the key partners conducted multiple assessments to understand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities that exist so that we could build from there. And on the slide, looking at the left-hand side, we're looking at the challenges and opportunities. And what we had back from these assessments were, number one, products and services that women seek were often not available at the nearest health facility. There was a significant time and financial cost traveling to the next facility option to access these products or services. Thirdly, money was not always available at the time the smallholder farmers needed it for healthcare because monthly direct deposit of tea income could mean that money comes every 30 days, and of course, illness isn't timed to that cycle. But there were also opportunities. Women belong to women's groups called chamas, which serve both a social objective as well as a savings financial objective. Secondly, there were conveniently located public health facility structures that existed around these women smallholders. So with this information, we went through multiple co-design rounds and developed different pilot designs that stakeholders and partners vetted. And finally, we settled on one, and this is what we have on the right-hand side. Of the different approaches, we decided to refurbish an existing health facility and strengthen the women's group so that the women's group could introduce small enterprises from which a portion of profits could be utilized to support supply and maintenance of the nearby public health facility. Next slide, please. So in consideration for the approach to use, sustainability was key. And part of the reason why this is a sustainable approach is because the process itself was participatory by the partners and key stakeholders, and there was a co-design process which ultimately leads to a collective action approach. So what we're saying is that everybody then is pitching in to solve this problem or this issue for the smallholder farmer. We also know from other work that we conduct in market development approaches that ultimately implementers such as ourselves should only play a facilitation role if you really want it to be sustainable, because we need the market players themselves driving the process, and that is how sustainability can be achieved. Secondly, because of this buy-in, we have been able to mobilize resources from different partners and stakeholders, both cash resources as well as in-kind resources from the different partners. Then the last item contributing to sustainability is that this approach, number one, aligns catalytic donor funds and aligns also to routine corporate operations. So things that corporates will be doing as they conduct their business, and also leverages public sector funding who have an interest in the population's well-being. And lastly, the community themselves are also involved through income generating activities. So when all these four come together, it lends itself towards sustainable service delivery. Next slide, please. So aside from sustainability, a consideration as well, because we are partnering with a global partner and we are looking to global audiences such as yourselves, is what is the ability to scale and replicate. So with a pilot proof of concept, once demonstrated, this will be an affordable and a sustainable health services model. Why do we say affordable? Because for the corporate partner and for other partners, indeed, it only requires an initial investment rather than year-on-year recurrent investment. Secondly, for Twinings, this process and model can be replicated across multiple tea sites that they work in, within Kenya and globally as well. Third, other corporates who work in similar environments, that is working with smallholder farmers across the globe as well, can replicate the process and the model, lending itself then to potential for large-scale replication. Next slide, please. So we take a pause and ask ourselves, why would a corporate partner invest? What is the business case for contributing to women's health? And looking through this, we know that there is, for the corporate partner in Twinings in this case, I'm reading from left to right, there is a competitive advantage. Evidence points to social performance, increasing and strengthening brand loyalty and staff retention. We know that investing in social initiatives can increase competitive advantage. And also, we do know that consumers are increasingly concerned about where products come from and are increasingly willing as well to pay more for ethically made products. I'll move to the next point on the right, productivity. This is rather straightforward, but if you have healthier workers with better access to health services, then they spend more time at work or less time away from work and are more productive while at work. The third business case and why would Twinings make this investment is stakeholder management. Corporates such as Twinings and of course others are increasingly finding themselves within the communities and with multiple stakeholders in this community. If the communities have got an improved quality of life, it lends itself to a more stable business environment. So companies are now more sensitive about the need to ensure that the communities are in a better off place, and then because that leads itself to a better business environment. The last point I want to make that is not so direct as a business case, but is a social case, that leaders within corporations do care about social problems. We acknowledge it's not all businesses that do this, but corporations that appreciate and value that individuals drive their organizations forward seek to understand what problems these individuals face, and once they better understand them, are able to make investments to try and alleviate these problems. So there is a social case for corporates to invest in women's health. Next slide, please. I have mentioned about partners and different stakeholders, and at this point I want to highlight the different stakeholders who are involved other than the two key partners. And the first is SIRET OEP. SIRET OEP stands for SIRET Outgrowers Empowerment and Producer Company. They are a cooperative membership organization that is made up of smallholder farmers. So they support the smallholder farmers to produce their tea, which is then sold onwards. The second is the public sector through the Nandi County government. In Kenya, the sub-national unit is called the county. And so in this case, this pilot is taking place in Nandi County. And of course, they want to improve health services and infrastructure for their population. The third key stakeholder is Eastern Produce Kenya. Eastern Produce Kenya is a tea producer, so they ultimately buy the tea from the smallholder farmers, they process it, and then they sell it on to Twinings Tea. And they want improved productivity and improved quality. And across each of these stakeholders, they all have an incentive to improve the well-being of smallholder farmers. But more importantly, none of these individual stakeholders was able to solve the problem on their own and had to come together. Next slide, please. So what lessons have we learned so far? There is a famous African proverb, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. And ultimately what we are finding is that market players must own the change process. This is from the pace of activities, the design of the project, and be able to modify both on planning, budgets, and other areas for the partnerships to really come together. And this ultimately then takes time to build trust and for each champion to navigate this process within the partnerships and back to their own parent organizations. Secondly, the public sector is an essential partner. The public sector has the interests of its population at heart and will be there for time, has been there and will be there going forward. So they're a key partner for sustainability and for aligning the project to other ongoing initiatives. The third point we learned is that global supply chains are complex and they often require aligning incentives across multiple private companies. From my own experience, when I got into this partnership, I did not anticipate that there were these multiple partners and stakeholders to work with, and actually thought maybe great, we're working with Twinings and we'll get this done and roll things out. But as you understand the processes, you identify that there are multiple private sector partners that have got to be involved and that come into play. Moving to the right, you need to be aware of these multiple partners' funding cycles and decision-making processes, and ultimately plan timelines for this and navigate this to bring this all together. We also need to identify win-win solutions for each partner and use their language rather than your own language while trying to sell the message, because that is what will get you quicker decisions made if you're using the same kind of language that the key partners can understand. And finally, an informed catalyst or honest broker can facilitate the process and bring all of these together to form the partnership and manage the partnership and take it forward. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. I look forward to further discussion during Q&A.
Thank you, Mbogo. And I already see questions coming in for you, which is great. Please feel free to continue to post your questions, and we will try and get to them all at the end. So I'm going to hand it over now to Walid Bella.
Thank you, Susan. My name is, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Walid Salam, the COB of Feed the Future Egypt Rural Agribusiness Incentive Project. Next slide, please. The main goal of this project is to develop the horticulture industry's abilities to better understand market signals and better respond to domestic and international buyer demand. The project consists of 4 main components. The first component, which is the most important one, is the marketing component. And in this component, we improve sustainable domestic and international market linkages between small farmers and high-end market. The second component is the agronomy one, and we increase productivity for small farmers and food processors through providing no-cost, low-cost solutions, and applications. The sales component is the post-harvest component, and we improve the post-harvest handling and storage. And the fourth component is the nutrition component. We improve the nutritional status of women and children. Next slide, please. We have very ambitious expected results. The first expected result is to increase average income of more than 120,000 small farmers in 5 years, double income of 25 small farmers, create 12,000 sustainable full-time job opportunities, improve agricultural water use efficiency over 22,000 hectares, and leverage $10 million through partnership with Egyptian as well as international organizations. As you can see, the hardest one is the fifth one, is leverage $10 million from private sector. Because of this, we use the following approach. Next slide, please. We foster the commercially oriented linkages between producer organizations and the high-end markets. The producer organization is association for small farmers. And the definition of small farmers in Egypt, farmers who own less than 10 acres. And the association is providing some kind of services for small farmers, like selling inputs at lower prices than the market, connecting farmers with the Ministry of Agriculture, and so on. So our approach is foster the commercially oriented linkages between small farmers and the high-end markets, including but not limited to supermarket, exporters, food processors, restaurants, and hotels. Next slide, please. One of the most successful activities we conducted in the first year of implementation is the partnership with PepsiCo. USAID, through Abt, signed a bilateral partnership with PepsiCo International to increase PepsiCo sourcing of potatoes from smallholder farmers in Upper East. Honestly speaking, it was not an easy task at all. It takes almost 6 months of negotiation. Why? Because PepsiCo and the project has different perspectives. Next slide, please. As you can see, the PepsiCo's current business model is completely different than the project business model. PepsiCo relies a lot on traders and sub-traders or collectors. The sub-trader goes to the farmer and collects whatever produce of high quality, low quality at a very low price, and the sub-trader doesn't provide any kind of support or technical assistance to farmers, and gets these produce and send it to the trader, who conduct some sort of sorting and grading and sell it to PepsiCo at much higher prices. Our business model relies on the producer organization and the farmer. As you can see, it's a shorter value chain. It has just 3 value chain actors: the producer organization, the farmer, and PepsiCo. And we, in this model, build the capacity of producer organizations in order to provide technical assistance to small farmers, access to finance in order to finance the farmers through loans, so farmers can get higher quality products, and they can sell it directly to PepsiCo through producer organization. So they can get higher prices. Higher prices means higher incomes, and so on. Next slide, please. Why did PepsiCo want to be part of this partnership? The answer is very simple, is the traceability. According to quality standards and the international certificates, and for the sake of transparency and the food safety, every single consumer has the right to know from where he gets his produce, from which country, from which government within the country, and from which village within the governorate, and from which farmer within the village, and from which piece of land from this of this farmer. So the traceability allows the consumer and all value chain actors to trace back or tracing and trace forward or tracking the produce for quality reasons. The idea was PepsiCo wanted us to improve and build the capacity of traders in order to have a system to calculate and to know the traceability of their produce. And this is not helping small farmers at all, and it is not sustainable at all. So the negotiation goes on this, our model or PepsiCo's model. Next slide, please. At the end, we agreed on going to pilot project. We started with 150 potato farmers in Venice Wave Governorate, one governorate, and Dallas Village, one village. The final model in which PepsiCo provides technical assistance in integrated pest management, IBM, while Abt provides full package of technical assistance in the field for land preparation, good agricultural practices, good harvesting practices, irrigation, fertilization, pesticides, and in-class training, including farming as a business. We teach farmers how to calculate their costs, how to calculate their revenues, how to know their net income, and if this net income is economically viable or not. Also, we train small farmers on marketing concepts like value addition concepts and value chain concepts and food safety. Next slide, please. The pilot result was excellent. Excellent. Productivity increased from 6 to 8 tons per acre in the baseline to 12 to 14 tons per acre in 4 months. Production costs decreased by 20%. Pesticides and fertilizers usage decreased by 25 to 30%, and net income increased by more than 100%. Next slide, please. Lessons learned. Please don't try to convince the private sector to change their business model at the beginning. It is not an easy task at all. Seeing is believing. Shows that different ways of doing things work. Start with a pilot. This is very important because seeing is believing. You have to start with a small pilot and to make sure that you have a good result. Small number of beneficiaries, small number of products, organizations, small number of partners. And this is very crucial. It's very crucial. Establish strict criteria in selecting producer organization or whatever partner you will work with. You have to make sure that they are committed, they have a discipline, they have a business attitude, and they are motivated. This is very important and crucial for the success of the pilot. And it is a learning by doing process. Next slide, please. Next steps. Now, after completing the pilot project, we are now moving from pilot to Global Development Alliance. Last week we had 5-hour virtual meeting, because of these circumstances of COVID-19 and all group activities and meetings were suspended. So we conducted these meetings virtually in order to move from pilot to GDA. We are thinking of adding more farmers, more governors, more activities, including gender, more financial contribution from PepsiCo, like adding $2 to $3 million to the program, and we are preparing separate work plan, milestones, results, expected results, and activities. Next slide, please. This is the group photo in the harvesting day, and the photo includes the mission directors, each mission director, and our core, the people from PepsiCo. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. You are most welcome. And here you find a link for a short video explaining the pilot brief. You are most welcome to go to this link and see our pilot in the video. Thank you.
Thank you, Walid. And you've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great. I'm glad everybody's so engaged. Hopefully we can get to them all, but at a minimum, we will make sure to respond to them all if needed after the webinar. So I now want to turn it over to Julia Newton-House. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak about investing in women. Like everyone, we are grappling with the rapid changes from the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 and shifting rapidly how the program operates. But I'm not going to talk about that today. If we can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to start with some overarching comments about the rationale for the program. Firstly, our program goal is to increase women's economic empowerment in Southeast Asia. But economic empowerment is measured at the level of the individual woman, and we're working with organizations. So while we've got good reason based on research to think we're having a positive impact on economic empowerment, we're not measuring those changes. We're measuring changes within organizations and specific populations. Now, most aid programs working on women's economic empowerment work with the bottom quintile of income earners because this is an important way to tackle poverty. But we're working with the formal sector and those in formal employment to address the structural barriers that women face in the economy. Working with the poorest is very important, but these groups alone will not lead to the necessary structural change for our societies to be gender equal. Why are we working with the private sector? Well, in 2016, when this program started, the private sector employed 2.8 billion individuals worldwide, and that represents 87% of total employment. So the private sector is critical to progress on SDG 5. The way women are treated by their employers is fundamental to their status in society, and employment has been an engine of social change around the world. So let me just explain what we're doing. We work across 3 pathways, and I've listed here the end of program outcomes for each of those. Firstly, we're working with large employers to improve workplace gender equality. Secondly, we're working with impact investors to increase the number of women entrepreneurs and small business owners who get funding to grow their businesses. And finally, we're working to address the gender norms which limit women's economic opportunities. I'll tell you a bit more about each of these pathways. Next slide, please. To build coalitions of private sector companies committed to gender equality, we approached the CEOs and chairs of large employers, mostly domestic companies rather than multinationals, to identify companies whose leadership was committed to workplace gender equality. We emphasized the large and growing literature around the business benefits of gender equality. Between 6 and 8 companies came together initially as founding members of each business coalition in each country. We helped them create a legal entity and hire a local staff for the coalition, and the founding members formed the board of this new entity. Founding members agreed that their companies would undergo EDGE certification. This is a Swiss-based certification for workplace gender equality. It's a data-driven approach. I've added their website here if you'd like more information. Over the past 2 years, the business coalitions have helped over 40 companies become EDGE certified, and they create action plans to move towards workplace gender equality. We have access to their data, which is helping us to develop local insights into key issues. The business coalitions continue to build their reputations as the go-to organisation to offer practical support for workplace gender equality, and they continue to build a local evidence base of the business benefits of workplace gender equality. Our vision for sustainability is that the business coalitions will become financially viable through selling services such as EDGE and other assessment services, alongside training, as recognition of the competitive advantages afforded by gender equality becomes more widespread across the private sector. If I can have the next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit about one of the companies who joined the coalition. Abt Dimension Footwear is an Indonesian company which manufactures 1.1 million pairs of running shoes each month under license to Nike. It's important for them to demonstrate their strong credentials in staff well-being. Abt was the first manufacturing company in Southeast Asia to be accredited at the EDGE Move level. One of the issues that was raised by the certification was the lack of women in management. So the company have taken a series of steps to address this, and I've put some of the results of that on the slide. So they've addressed a range of other things, but that one in particular stands out. I know many in the audience work on health programs, and you may be wondering if there are opportunities to promote women's health through this initiative. So one critical factor in retaining women in the workplace is access to parental leave. EDGE certification requires information about maternity and paternity leave, including whether staff return after taking this leave and any special provisions to support returning parents. In all 4 countries where we work, there are requirements within their labour code for employees to get paid maternity leave of at least 3 months. And as part of the EDGE certification, companies are checked for compliance. So we do know that all employees have access to this paid maternity leave. Paid paternity leave, on the other hand, ranges from 2 to 15 days in these countries. And we know that increasing paternity leave has a big impact on the extent to which men take responsibility for childcare and unpaid housework. So we're also raising opportunities for increased paternity leave with employers. Next slide, please. So moving on to pathway 2. Global evidence shows that women are less likely to receive funding than men right across the spectrum of finance, except in microfinance. So there's this pervasive stereotype that all women need is $100 or a goat. Actually, women need the same opportunities as men right across the economy. And we're working in one part of that with small and medium enterprises. We use the IFC definition of small and medium enterprise, that is 10 to 300 full-time staff, total assets and total annual sales of anywhere between $100,000 and $15 million. We're working with 8 different impact investors with deals ranging from $100,000 to up to $2 million. We don't work directly with the women business owners. We're working with the investors. We provide technical assistance on gender and how to understand the ways in which their staff, systems and processes discriminate against women. And in many cases they do, usually without realizing it. We've also provided support to expand companies' operations in Southeast Asia and a small pool of funds to to invest only in women-owned and led companies. To date, investments have been made in 27 companies. That sounds small, but it actually represents a very significant increase in the number of intentional investments by impact investors in women SMEs in these countries compared with the whole of the previous decade. We're measuring impact results across 5 different dimensions, and I'm showing here the financial leverage that the deals themselves and follow-on funds have been able to deliver to date. In addition, we track jobs created, number of female decision makers in investee companies, and impacts on clients, suppliers, and customers. Impact investing is a growing segment of the financial sector. Of course, we're only working with a small number of impact investors, but we also have partnerships with key industry groups globally and regionally, and participate in a range of industry events to spread information about the experience of our partners in successfully investing in women. Women-owned and led businesses are an underserved segment of the market and represent a significant opportunity for investors. Next slide, please. Through Pathway 3, we're working to address the gender stereotypes and norms which limit women's economic opportunities, including around men's roles in unpaid house and care work. Again, we work with local partners, including private sector entities, and specifically we're targeting urban millennials as the group most likely to lead change. Given time, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but happy to pick up any questions. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? Of course, our M&E is really directed to understanding how we're progressing gender equality, but I've tried to draw out some lessons here specific to partnering with the private sector. So the premise behind our business coalition was that large companies will be influenced by their peers in the private sector. And this is proving correct. Having influential champions who are well connected and respected in the business community has been critical in drawing new members into the business coalitions and spreading information about the business advantages of a gender equal workforce. We have to understand the organizational and individual incentives for change. And this in part means being able to demonstrate the business case for gender equality. Global data is easily dismissed as not relevant in the local environment. So we certainly see basing a business case on local data is much more compelling. And in fact, we've learned that there are many different business cases, depending on the industry, the client base, and so forth. So broad experience is really important to create widespread change. We've seen some rapid positive change, including in organizational culture and practice in our impact investors. They're smaller than the business coalition members on average and have particular incentives for change, which we've been able to tap into. Many private sector leaders are reluctant to publicly champion social issues like gender equality. It isn't yet accepted as part of the business sector's responsibility in the countries where we work, despite the strong evidence that this is improving business performance. And in particular, male leaders are struggling with creating an effective narrative around this. But we see that the millennial generation of emerging leaders are particularly going to be able to drive change. And finally, data is important, but sometimes it's just not enough against entrenched social norms and beliefs. And the last slide, thank you, I'll leave it there.
Okay. I want to thank Mbogo, Walid, and Julia for their presentations. And while each presentation described partnerships developed in very different contexts with different goals, all three pointed to some common lessons. The first is that partnerships do require catalysts, and in all three of these examples, donor-funded projects actually help build the bridge between the corporate sector and the ultimate beneficiary. Another key lesson that came out from all three examples is that corporate partners will each have a different motivation for entering into the partnership. So, of course, it's critical to not only understand that motivation, but understanding that motivation is usually not enough. I think, as really well stated by my colleague Waleed, seeing is believing, and by demonstrating success, can a partnership be? When demonstrating success, you can often build a partnership with solid enough footing to grow and scale. So, starting with a pilot to demonstrate the partnership is feasible is often a critical first step. Now, a lot of questions have been coming in, so I'm going to turn it right over to questions. The first question, I'm going to actually ask you and Mbogo two questions, and then we'll keep rotating across the speakers. So the first is there any formal agreement with Twinings? The second is, how do you define an honest catalyst?
Thank you, Susan, and to the people who asked the question. Yes, there is a formal partnership agreement with Twinings, and this is captured through a documented MOU between Twinings and ourselves. And I mentioned in my presentation about shared objectives and contributions and obligations. So that is documented and captured within the MOU.
Yeah, go ahead.
Moving to the second question about an honest broker, well, or an honest catalyst. The way I look at this is this needs to be a player who has an interest in growing the market or achieving those objectives without actually wanting to be a market player themselves. As Susan mentioned, a common thread across the three presentations is that the catalyst in this case was donor-funded initiatives. And in our case, as Shops Plus, what we brought to the table was also credibility and technical expertise, because we work and have worked in the area of health markets and making markets work and working with the private sector. So when the corporate partners looked around, they had a certain comfort level in working with us. And that's one point. And the second is because we also then had the mandate from the donor to participate in growing the market without trying to be a player themselves. That made us a good definition of an honest catalyst. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, I'm going to turn the next question over to Julia. Two questions. First is, when seeking to partner with a company to improve gender equality, are there certain characteristics one should be looking for that are more likely to result in success? And then the other one, which is totally not related to that first one, is does DFAT require programs to have an impact on the lives of poorer women?
So, partnering with companies, what are the sort of key factors? Well, leadership really matters. So, having the CEO executive team really committed to make change happen is, and then their ability to communicate that throughout the organization to convince middle management, which is often a critical factor. Being systematic, so using tools like EDGE, a willingness to do an assessment and then see a systematic process to bring change about. And finally, make people accountable so making managers accountable for change. I think those are the critical things in seeing traction. Does DFAT require us to have an impact on the poorest people? Well, clearly that's an objective of DFAT's overall aid program, is poverty alleviation. The impact we're having is indirect, because by addressing the structural barriers that affect all women in the economy, we will be able to change the opportunities that women right across the economy can have access to.
Okay, thank you. Waleed, what is transferable from the PepsiCo model to smaller companies?
Our business model in the project, it is not our model. It is the modern agribusiness model, and I learned this model in Europe. And this model is very successful, relying on cooperatives or producer organizations. This is very sustainable. If you build the capacity of producer organizations, so they can provide whatever assistance farmers need. So they can deal with the small companies and big companies as well. It is not about small company or big company. It is about how to make small farmers able to deal with these small companies or big companies. So with the small companies, it's much easier than dealing with PepsiCo. So now we did the big thing, so it's easy to go and deal with small companies.
Okay, and while I have you, I'm going to ask you another question. How will other farmers get technical assistance if necessary after the project ends?
Yeah, when we build the capacity of producer organization, we build the capacity of individuals, of staff of producer organizations. So we equip them with technical as well as business skills. So by the end of the project, these people will be ready to provide these technical assistance to all farmers. Because by law, all farmers are integrated to cooperatives or producer organizations. Every single farmer is integrated to at least one association or one cooperative. So he can find, by the end of the project, he can find the technical assistance at the producer organization. Because of this, it's a very sustainable way.
Okay, thank you. And Bogo, to work with the public sector, this is this person's point of view, to work with the public sector can be a long and bureaucratic process. What challenges did you face to work with them, and specifically, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you, Susan. So there are maybe 2 points I want to highlight. One was about scheduling and scheduling meetings or getting a time when we would be able to meet and engage. And this required flexibility on our part. By our part, I mean all partners and stakeholders. Before reaching out and as we plan to reach out to the public sector, the stakeholders identified the public sector was key to the sustainability and to the ownership of the activity. So as a key audience, we were agreed that we have got to be flexible and responsive to the timings of the public sector. This always wasn't planned in advance, say 7 days. It might need a 24 or 48 turnaround time to be able to gather and go and meet so that you can be able to engage with the public sector. So flexibility on our part was very important. Number two also was about the need to then, from our perspective as partners and stakeholders, understand public sector priorities and be able to amend our approach to then also align to or accommodate and align to what public sector is trying to make happen. In that way, then your activity is serving part of their interest and you're aligning incentives all around. So that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, how did PT Addis achieve the increase in women in management? Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. I think it was important that they initially recognized it as one of the barriers to greater productivity through workplace gender equality. I think often people think this is just the way it is when they look around where women and men are in their companies. But once they clearly had the data in front of them, and the CEO is actually a woman in this organization, there were a series of initiatives to move forward. And I think it's things like in mentoring women who you believe can move into that position and encouraging women to apply. It's insisting with your HR department that they put women on any, in any recruitment, that they don't just put forward male candidates, but they put forward female and male candidates. And I think it was communicating within the organisation that this shift to gender equality was meant to encourage much broader set of applications for those sorts of, and I think the staff saw that the company took it as a very serious initiative. So they've really been able to achieve quite a big step up in a few years.
Thank you. Waleed, I think this is really probably more of a clarification question, but are your farmers individual farmers or do they work in a cooperative system? If individual, how do you manage cost of intensive investments such as irrigation at the farmer level? Did I lose you? Hello?
I'm sorry. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Yes. We are not working with individuals, and the private sector doesn't want to work with individuals. It's a mess. So the solution is working with cooperatives and producer organizations. It's much easier, much more sustainable working with institutions than working with individuals.
Okay, and then a related question, which I think is also a clarification. What's the payment process for potato producers?
What is the payment practices? We PepsiCo after 45 days of harvest.
Okay. I'm not an agricultural expert, so hope that answers the question.
It is tough a little bit for the small farmers because small farmers, they don't have a lot of financial resources. So because of this, we connect the association with access to finance, with financial institutions. Farmers can get loans in order to cover all their costs during the harvesting and production during the season.
Yeah, that's helpful because actually there's another question, and how are you catering for the financing needs of farmers?
Yes, as I mentioned, it is easy to connect the institution or the producer organization or cooperative to financial institutions. So they can get loans for small farmers, and small farmers can use these loans in the cultivation of these high-end crops.
Okay. And Julia, I have two questions for you. How is the work on gender norms designed to have a sustainable effect? And the second question is, for investing in women, is there a plan to use tools other than EDGE?
Sure. So the gender norms work, we're working with local partners, and because their voices, what we want to do is really provide more skills and information so that local partners become more skilled at tackling gender norms, and that's really the plan for sustainability. We're also conducting a range of research to ensure that that this work is based on really a solid knowledge base. And one of the early things we've done is a really interesting review of gender stereotypes in advertising in the Philippines with the University of the Philippines. And that's being taken out to advertising companies in the Philippines to encourage them to see the negative impacts of the continuing use of stereotypes in advertising. So really it's through that process of upskilling local partners that we see the sustainability will be embedded into the program. On the tools, EDGE was a good place to start because it's a reasonably well known. But we have developed other tools internally that are more simple and that they target specific areas where change is needed. So we're doing more tool development as the program goes ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to turn one over to Mbogo. So private sector is often interested in the bottom line and will not invest in a loss-making business. Do you have a business case comparing this enterprise against business as usual to show they can be financially competitive? That's a really hard one, but go for it.
Thank you, Susan. Well, we have data from other global businesses, and even published data that looks at the return on investment by companies for making this kind of investments. So it definitely makes sense from the global perspective, and that is what we relied on while coming up with this kind of investment. So that's one. There is actual data. This can be shared. Studies can be shared. But aside from published data, even you look across and do a quick market scan across industries, you will find that typically the top players in the different industries are all making some aspect of social investment because it makes business case. And as the questioner rightly put, companies or corporates are interested in the bottom line. So these decisions are being made after a consideration of how will this impact the bottom line. And it is pointing that it will positively impact, and that's why the market leaders are making these sorts of investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbogo. And thank you to all three presenters. I know it's very late in Australia, and we've had people calling in from all around the world. So I want to thank both our presenters and our many participants. We'll be posting this webinar with the audio, and we will try and answer some of the remaining questions and post that all next week. So thank you very much for joining us, and everybody have a good rest of your day and stay safe. Thank you.